For years, every major motorcycle manufacturer had an adventure bike in their lineup. Honda had the Transalp, Yamaha had the Tenere 700, KTM offered 3 different 390 adventure models, depending on how dirty you wanted to get. Even CFMoto, a Chinese brand most people had not heard of 5 years ago, showed up with a fully capable adventure twin that cost less than a used Ninja. And Kawasaki? Kawasaki had the KLR 650, a single-cylinder thumper designed in 1987 that weighs more than some full-size touring bikes. A machine so unchanged that if you swap the fuel injection back to a carburetor, a time traveler from the Reagan administration would not notice a difference. But then, in late 2024, Kawasaki teased a 21-inch spoked front wheel at the EICMA motorcycle show in Milan. Just the wheel, no bike attached. The entire adventure riding community collectively lost their minds, because a front wheel like that from Kawasaki could only mean one thing. They were finally, after decades of sitting on the sidelines, going to build a real adventure motorcycle. The question is whether the bike they actually built lives up to that hype. The answer is more complicated than you would expect. The 2026 Kawasaki KLE 500 rolled out of Kawasaki's factory as a brand new model, but the name actually has a history. The original KLE 500 ran from 1991 all the way to 2007, using a detuned twin from the GPZ 500S sport bike. It wore a similar 21-inch front wheel and everything. The catch? It was only sold in Europe and parts of Asia. North American riders never got it. So when Kawasaki discontinued that bike, they replaced it with the Versys 650, which dropped any pretense of off-road capability in favor of 17-inch cast wheels and a sport touring focus. Kawasaki's official website still calls the Versys an adventure tourer. Reviewers call it a commuter with a tall windshield. Meanwhile, the KLR 650 just kept chugging along. It served in the United States Marine Corps. Budget overlanders rode it around entire continents on the cheap. It survived a discontinuation in 2018 and came back in 2022 with fuel injection and not much else. The KLR earned its legend. But calling it a modern adventure bike in 2026 is like calling a rotary phone a smartphone because it can still make calls. The pressure on the KLE 500 was enormous. What Kawasaki delivered is genuinely interesting, even if it is not what the hardcore adventure crowd was hoping for. Under that rally-inspired bodywork sits a 451 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled parallel twin. If that displacement sounds familiar, it should. This is the same engine from the Ninja 500 sport bike, the Z500 naked bike, and the Eliminator 500 cruiser. Same bore and stroke at 70 by 58.6 millimeters, same 11.3 to 1 compression ratio, same 51 horsepower at 10,000 RPM. Yes, 10,000 RPM. This is not a lazy torque machine. You have to wring it out. And right away that creates some strong opinions. A sport bike engine in an adventure bike means the power lives at high revs, and the gearing is optimized for speed, not for crawling over rocky terrain at walking pace. Kawasaki addressed this by recalibrating the engine control unit mapping and fitting a unique 46/15 final drive ratio designed specifically for the balance between highway cruising and off-road tractability. They also tilted the entire engine forward on its output shaft axis, a clever trick borrowed from sport bike design that lowers the center of gravity despite the taller ride height. Kawasaki also fitted a downdraft intake system that provides a short, direct airflow path to the cylinders for more efficient breathing at high RPM. Sitting above the engine is a massive 5.6-liter airbox with asymmetric intake funnels at different heights. Those different heights smooth out torque valleys in the mid-range, so the throttle response feels more linear than the Ninja 500 it came from. And about that 500 in the name. The bike displaces 451 cubic centimeters. Kawasaki calls it a 500 to match the branding of the Ninja 500 and Z500. In Europe, the power output is tuned down to 45 horsepower to stay within the A2 license category, which is limited by power, not engine size. That means younger European riders can buy it without needing a full license. Smart commercial move. But the displacement rounding did not land particularly well with enthusiast forums. Now the chassis is where things get genuinely clever, and also where the compromises start to show. The frame is a high tensile steel trellis design that weighs just 41.8 pounds, and it uses the engine as a stressed member. Front suspension comes from KYB with 43mm inverted cartridge forks and 210mm of travel, or 8.3 inches. That is among the longest front travel figures in this price class. For comparison, the Honda NX500 only gets 5.9 inches up front. But there is a catch. Those KYB forks have zero compression or rebound adjustment. None. At $6,599, the CFMoto Ibex 450 gives you fully adjustable KYB suspension front and rear. That is a real miss from Kawasaki. The rear uses Kawasaki's Uni-Track linkage system with 196mm of travel and stepless preload adjustment. Decent, but again, no damping adjustability. Wheels are tube-type spoked units with a proper 21-inch front, which is exactly what the adventure crowd wanted to see. The rear is a 17-inch wheel wearing a 140/70 tire. That is a road-biased size and a road-biased profile. The KTM 390 Adventure R runs a taller 18-inch rear. So does the CFMoto Ibex. Because the KLE 500 uses tube-type wheels, you do not get the convenience of tubeless tires for easy roadside puncture repair. The Ibex offers tubeless spoked wheels at a lower price. That stings. And then there is ground clearance. Kawasaki originally listed it at just 6.8 inches, which triggered an immediate firestorm of criticism in the motorcycle press. They later revised it upward to 7.3 inches without explaining the discrepancy. Even at 7.3 inches, the KLE 500 sits notably lower than the CFMoto Ibex at 8.7 inches, the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 at 9 inches, and the KTM 390 Adventure R at a towering 10.7 inches. The engineering reason comes down to the exhaust header routing beneath the engine. When asked about it during the press launch in Spain, Kawasaki's development team explained they wanted to minimize drivetrain changes from the other 500 models, and rerouting the exhaust would have required new engine homologation and retuning that would have killed the attractive price point. So you get a tall seat at 34.3 inches, sitting above a low belly. It is the packaging equivalent of a person with long legs and a short torso. But on the road, none of that matters, because the KLE 500 is genuinely impressive on pavement. Journalists from Visor Down rode it through the Spanish countryside and praised the front end as beautifully damped, saying you can lean heavily on the forks under braking without the bike falling through its stroke. Adventure. Bike Rider called its on-road composure one of the bike's biggest strengths. The 1000 PS test in Spain found it leans into corners willingly, requiring very little input to flow through winding roads. At 51 horsepower, the KLE 500 tops every direct competitor in this segment, and riders who are willing to use the full rev range will find it genuinely entertaining. Every reviewer described the engine character differently. Visor Down called it a little screamer that sounds genuinely good when you push it hard. MCN was more measured, describing straightforward forward motion without much drama. The truth probably sits somewhere in between. This is a rev-happy parallel twin, not a thumpy torque monster. If you like the character of the Ninja 500, you'll love this engine in adventure clothing. Where the KLE 500 caught everyone off guard is off-road. The internet consensus before anyone actually rode it was that this bike would be terrible in the dirt. Too low, too road-biased, a sport bike engine with no low-end grunt. Then journalists actually took it on gravel roads and light trails, and the story changed. Ergonomics play a huge role. Because of that tall seat and low belly paradox, Kawasaki could position the foot pegs directly underneath the rider's sitting point instead of kicking them backward like competing bikes do. That means when you stand up on the pegs, you stand straight up, exactly like you would on a dirt bike. On some competing adventure middleweights, standing up can push you forward into an awkward lean. Visor Down highlighted this, saying the KLE 500 is one of the few bikes in its class that feels perfectly at home, whether sitting or standing. The weight balance also helps. The bike feels more forgiving at the front end, which is exactly what less experienced off-road riders want. Losing the front end is the scariest thing that can happen on dirt, and the KLE 500 naturally reduces that risk. That said, this is not a rally bike, and Kawasaki's marketing tagline, "Life's a rally ride," it is doing some heavy lifting. MCN's review put it bluntly: the bike is built for riders making their first foray into adventure riding, not for those trying to emulate rally racers. The 1000 PS test found the fork bottoms out on deeper bumps at higher off-road speeds. Every single reviewer noted vibration building above 6,500 RPM, with visor down describing a persistent fizz through the entire bike when pushing hard. If you're finding this useful, hit subscribe. We break down new motorcycles and adventure riding gear every week. Now let's talk about what the KLE 500 is actually competing against, because this segment is absolutely stacked right now. The CFMoto Ibex 450 costs $6,499, which is $100 less than the Kawasaki, and gives you a 449 cubic centimeters twin, making 44 horsepower, fully adjustable KYB suspension, tubeless spoked wheels in a proper 21-inch and 18-inch setup, and 8.7 inches of ground clearance. On paper, the Ibex wins the off-road spec battle convincingly. The question mark is long-term reliability and dealer network. CFMoto has been in North America for barely a handful of years, and long-term durability over very high mileage is still being proven. The KTM 390 Adventure R at $6,999 is the hardcore choice. It runs a 399 cubic centimeters single cylinder making 45 horsepower, but it delivers 10.7 inches of ground clearance, fully adjustable WP suspension with 9 inches of travel front and rear, 21-inch and 18-inch wheels, and a curb weight of just 388 pounds. If your riding is more than 50% off-road, the KTM is the obvious pick. The trade-off is that single-cylinder buzz on long highway stretches and potentially higher maintenance costs, depending on how hard you ride it. The Royal Enfield Himalayan 450 undercuts everyone at $5,799 and brings a surprisingly modern 452 cubic centimeters single with integrated Google Maps navigation, a center stand, and a 3-year warranty. It is the value king. The trade-off is 40 horsepower and an engine character that long-distance riders find fatiguing compared to twins. And the Honda NX500 at $7,399 is essentially an adventure-styled road bike. Cast 19-inch and 17-inch wheels, barely 6 inches of front suspension travel, and the highest price in the class. It is the right bike if you never actually plan to leave the pavement but want the upright riding position and the look. So where does the KLE 500 actually fit? It is the do-everything compromise. More off-road capable than the Honda, more refined and proven than the CFMoto, smoother on highways than the KTM or Himalayan, and backed by Kawasaki's decades of dealer infrastructure and parts availability. That engine platform has been proving itself across multiple Kawasaki models for years, and at $6,599, the base KLE 500 is actually $400 cheaper than the base KLR 650 sitting right next to it in the dealership. Speaking of which, the KLR 650 is not going anywhere. Kawasaki is keeping both bikes in the 2026 lineup. The KLR targets budget overlanders who value simplicity, a massive 6.1-gallon fuel tank, and easy repairability anywhere on the planet. The KLE 500 targets modern adventure riders who want rally styling, lighter weight, and a parallel twin. Different bikes for different philosophies. For an extra $900, the KLE 500 SE bumps the base model's monochrome LCD screen to a 4.3-inch full-color TFT display, adds a taller adjustable windshield, metal-reinforced handguards, a larger aluminum skid plate, and LED turn signals. According to RevZilla's breakdown, every single SE upgrade, except the TFT display, can be purchased individually as Kawasaki accessories for the base model. So the only thing locked behind the SE trim is that color screen. So was it worth the wait? If you were expecting Kawasaki to drop a Tenere 700 competitor with rally spec suspension and serious off-road credentials, no. That bike does not exist yet in their lineup, and the KLE 500 is not trying to be it. But if you are a new adventure rider looking for your first proper adventure bike, or a commuter who wants to explore gravel roads and forest trails on weekends without giving up highway comfort during the week, The KLE 500 makes a genuinely compelling case. It has the strongest power figure among its direct competitors, arguably the best ergonomics, the proven reliability of a Japanese twin-cylinder engine, and a price that undercuts almost everything around it. The adventure motorcycle market in 2026 has never been this competitive or this affordable. And the fact that Kawasaki is finally in the fight, even if they showed up fashionably late, means every other manufacturer has to sharpen their game. That is good for riders no matter which badge is on the tank, and really that might be the most important thing the KLE 500 accomplishes. Not being the best at any one thing, but making sure nobody else gets to coast.